Hey everybody, I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World, and we're getting serious in here. I don't care how many days it takes in reality, by the end of this video, we will get to the bottom of the hesitation issues we've been facing with our 92 NSX, so stick around. Now, if you haven't been following our hesitation diagnostic saga, you can catch up in these three videos here, which culminated with us dropping the tank and changing the fuel pump. However, in lieu of that whole explanation, let me summarize. Some quick background, as our NSX isn't entirely stock anymore. The motor is a 3.2 liter bottom end with 3 liter heads. The only difference between the NA1 3 liter and NA2 3.2 liter fuel systems are the injectors. The fuel pump, resistor, filter, and regulator are all the same from the factory. In our case, though, we use an adjustable fuel pressure regulator to make up the difference in fuel delivery that a true NA2 solves with injectors, because the latter are not a plug-and-play solution. Now on to our problem. Starting at the firm back in the spring and then confirmed on the road thereafter, we noted some faltering acceleration when opening the throttle significantly, starting at 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. This was accompanied by a notable, if not drastic, engine speed ramp that would happen around 4,000 RPM. Following initial research into the problem, we ran a test in which we bypassed the fuel pump resistor, a device that's in place to allow the fuel pump to run at a lower duty cycle when full pressure isn't necessary. Bypassing the resistor did relieve symptoms, however the symptoms resurfaced even with a new resistor in the loop. That then suggested an ailing fuel pump. The pump in our car was 30 years and 300,000 miles old, and we were now asking more of it with some added displacement, so we elected to go ahead and throw this particular part at the problem since it's been on the short list for preventative maintenance for a while now. With a whole new pump in the loop, it was time to repeat our testing. Here is the resulting video with the new pump and new resistor. So that catches you up to where we are today, and of course it begs the first question of, did changing the fuel pump solve the problem? And as you might have imagined by the intro to this video, the answer to that is no. However, it does rule out both the fuel pump and the fuel pump resistor as suspects, since they have now, the problem rather has now presented itself identically with an old pump, a new pump, an old resistor, and a new resistor in various combinations. So, what are our next steps from here? Well, first we tried one thing on a whim because it was easy. In the course of publishing these first three videos, we'd received some always valuable input from the NSX owner community. One person had experienced something at least remotely similar that ended up being due to a bad alternator. This passed logic, as the pump might not be delivering as much if it wasn't getting enough juice. We happen to have a spare alternator on the shelf, so we had it tested at a local parts chain, and upon receiving a clean bill of health, we swapped it in and reran our test. Still, no change. You can see in the post-alternator swap test where the fuel pressure starts at around 44 to 45 psi, briefly bumps to 47 to 48, and then slowly bleeds close to 40 psi before jumping a nearly full 20 psi when the resistor gets bypassed. That didn't seem normal. I wrote Chris at SOS to verify where they'd set the car at idle and wide open throttle on their dyno, as well as throwing our scenario past him for an expert opinion. From that conversation, I gleaned that the startup pressure was lower than where they'd left it. There shouldn't be bleed down, and the pressure jump should be more like 5 to 10 psi versus 20 when the resistor gets bypassed. That pointed back to a fuel pressure issue, then having ruled out electrical shenanigans for now. In the meantime, more community commentary by Joe G had brought up one scenario where an AEM fuel pressure regulator had caused some shenanigans while still outwardly appearing intact. With the signs already pointing that direction by order of elimination, I ordered a rebuild kit from AEM. Prior to disassembly, I measured the adjustment screw position to ensure it was returned to its original setting. Rebuilding an AEM FPR involves replacing the diaphragm and orifice tube. When I removed the diaphragm and dried the residual fuel out of the regulator, I didn't discover any really obvious damage, but I did find some weird debris that I'm forced to assume is either some kind of Loctite or potentially leftover chip from cutting the threads into the housing for the orifice tube. I also noted that the ball in the middle of the diaphragm appeared to have some light pitting, and that the inside of the orifice tube had some of what a machinist friend has politely called apprentice marks. After reassembling per AEM's online PDF instructions, I reset the adjustment screw and checked the static pressure, which was now higher than before, and then we reran our test scenario. Upon starting the car, the fuel pressure was now higher at idle and had more fluctuation with throttle input than previously when we had both the pump and resistor in the loop. Running the same 2002 over 6,000 RPM test on the road, the pressure was definitely more volatile than prior to the rebuild, but the hesitation symptoms had disappeared. However, I noticed the notably higher pressure after the resistor cut, as well as the liftoff pressure spikes, which is something the AEM FPR is specifically advertised to avoid with its design. Following those odd results, I wanted to check my work, so I disassembled, and finding nothing out of place, reassembled the regulator. I considered that some of the clearances may have changed as the adjustment screw had hit something of a hard stop at the point where it matched its original setting. If it were wound too tight, it could potentially be overpowering the pump and not really regulating anything, so I took the step of winding out the adjustment and then walking it back in with the car idling to set the on-off vacuum pressures back to what SOS had originally. This left us with an idle pressure close to 50 psi, which would, in theory, jump closer to 60 psi at wide open throttle after the resistor was bypassed. Here's how that bore out on the road. Mercifully, it seems we finally landed on a combination that both relieves the hesitation symptoms with the fuel pump resistor still connected and isn't potentially overpressuring the fuel system. Great success. So with that successful test drive in the books, I think we're going to call this one good for now. We've gotten on top of our hesitation, and therefore we will be less hesitant, some pun intended, about driving the car and putting miles on it going forward, which will be a relief. Now, our cycle of diagnostics there did involve more work than was probably actually necessary to get to the bottom of the issue, but we skipped a few steps to do some preventative things, such as the fuel pump, because it was 30 years and 300,000 miles old. I will just feel better having it in there, having a new one in there versus the original to the car, as we plan to do more driving and more, potentially remote places. We'll be less likely to have a fuel issue leave us standing at this point, I think, overall. So, with that said, and given where we landed, just kind of take that away as a data point. I don't know anything about AEM's, QC process or where their stuff is manufactured, but I think suffice to say that if you are running an AEM fuel pressure regulator and you are experiencing some weird fuel delivery stuff, irrespective of how new or old that regulator is, don't rule it out immediately as a suspect. The rebuild kit in this case was like $60. They're a little proud of those in my opinion for what they are, but that's still relatively cheap in context of having to replace the whole thing or source another different fuel pressure regulator to get the job done. So we'll again continue to report back if we do experience anything else with that, but hopefully giving it kind of a thorough cleaning and replaced the couple of key components there, we should be good to go for a while. But with that said, thanks again for watching and coming on this journey with us. If you feel like I've missed anything or left out any details, feel free to ask in the comments. I'll happily answer. And until next time, I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World, and we'll see you guys all in the next video, if not at the track.